there. My name is Dr. Kim Ernest. I am a licensed psychologist, licensed professional counselor, the host of the How to Be Happy Hour, the president of Pennsylvania Counseling Services, and the founder of Live Up Counseling. And today on the pod, we will be talking about sibling relationships and the impact that these early childhood friends or mortal enemies plays on our quest for happiness across the lifespan.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Lutz. I work for Pennsylvania Counseling Services in the Facilities Department. I am the mother of triplets, and we also have a 23-year-old. So lots of experience there with the age gap siblings and very close together siblings.
Hi, I'm Mel Morgan. I am the clinical consultant for Berks County Family Based, as well as the assistant director of the Pennsylvania Clinical Training Institute. I have been with Pennsylvania Counseling 10 years now, and in my roles, I've worked in family-based, and so I've worked with a lot of families and have a lot of experience in working with sibling dyad relationships and triads. Also a mom of 3 kids. We have a blended family, so some interesting pieces in blending siblings together.
Well, thank you all for joining me here today. We've got a slightly smaller pod than we usually do, but I think that that's only fitting because this is a topic that when I was preparing for today's pod, there is such little research looking at sibling relationships. And as I was reading through the different studies that I could find, and a lot of them are really old, honestly, and then quite a few of them are focused on really niche areas like birth order and those influences or gender dynamics or some of those different layers. But when it comes to like really digging in to the impact of sibling relationships, there is very little research out there. What I discovered is that obviously sibling relationships and sibling bonds influence attachment styles quite a bit, but what we don't know is really how or the mechanism under which it influences attachment styles. There's also a lot of research or data kind of looking into dysfunctional sibling relationships, sibling rivalry, and how things like neglect and trauma may play into the sibling dynamic or sibling relationships. But overall, while this relationship seems uniquely different than just about any other type of relationship we will experience, it is really under-researched and underutilized. So I think where I was really hoping to start here today is this talk or this concept of birth order and whether or not the order in which different children are born heavily influences their personality patterns, like the pop psychology suggests that it will. And my only real experience with that, like in my family system growing up, as well as in my current family system, we fall into those birth order stereotypes like perfectly. But we have lots of friends that do not, and family systems that we interact with. And I've worked with a lot of different families who do not fall into that space. So what are our thoughts? How do we... Does birth order really shape personality, or is this just some pop psychology myth?
Well, I think it really has to do with the family culture, right? And so is there a spoken or unspoken rule about what the older sibling's role is? I think when you have an older sibling and there is a culture created in the family where the older sibling is in charge, right? So they're the ones who are oftentimes left to like watch over the younger siblings. They are the ones who go pick up the kids off the bus. Like, I really think it has to do with the family system and like the family culture, the rules, values, rituals, beliefs. But then, like you're saying, Kim, I see a lot of shifts. I see a lot of shifts in like my own kids, right? And so it's like my little guy, he's never the one who's in charge. But
By design,
by
actually,
design,
yeah.
yes. Yeah. And by our choice. But yeah, we. I think that like kind of passing back and forth between the older siblings of who's kind of responsible for what, and that may also be because of like the differences in gender. Like there's just a lot of, I think, different contributing factors when it comes to like kind of the values that are instilled in the family and the roles everybody falls into.
So it's a little odd for me because we had a child and he was an only child for 14 years. So he always exhibited characteristics of the oldest, the middle, and the youngest. So he was all of them. He did all of them. And then he was 14 and we were like, hey, here's some siblings. You get 3 at once. And the triplets are very big on, they know who was baby A, who was baby B, and who was baby C.
So they know their birth order,
They do.
even though they were minutes apart.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and I know like in the triplet community, some people will hold that as like, who's older, and they'll have, you know, for their like sweet 16 or their graduation, they'll like let them know who it was. We've always been honest with them. They wanted to know. And a lot of people will ask them when they're like, oh, you're triplets? Who's the oldest? To which my daughter very happily raises her hand and says, that's me. So we have a girl and 2 boys. So my daughter is baby A, and then the boys are baby B and C. And so the triplets are kind of their own little thing. So my daughter, who is the oldest, is typical oldest child. Now she has an older brother, but I would say even between the 2 of them, my older son would approve of this and he would agree. Even between the 2 of them, she is the oldest. She is responsible. She does everything. She follows every rule. She just is typical oldest. Technically, she's the middle, but she's the oldest. And then the other 2, baby B was born literally a minute after her. He's typical middle child. And then my youngest is very typical, the youngest child.
The youngest.
I've gotten accused of calling him being the favorite. So just, yeah, typical. He's the baby of the family. But
See, both my kids think my other child is my favorite. And I think that's a sign of successful parenting. I think the fact that they both think I like the other, or wildly unsuccessful parenting, I'm not sure yet, but they both believe that I'm easier on the other, that I'm softer to the other, that
I would go with your first statement. I would think that that's something good.
I think so. I like to think, I think that at least tracks that I disappoint them both equally at different points in time. And
Learn to use that to your advantage yet.
not yet.
Okay.
My running joke was always my favorite is whoever sleeps better. But very quickly, my youngest just annihilates my oldest in terms of sleeping. Like my oldest just inherited my sleep like he's really early to rise. He now learns that when I wake up, I read my Kindle, and I don't bother the rest of the family. So we've learned some coping skills for some of those habits, but it used to be whoever sleeps better, but since one always won, I couldn't make that joke anymore, and now it's.
I'm going to use dinner time here as an example. So I have one child who will live off of chicken nuggets and chicken nuggets alone and pancakes. And then I have another child who will eat everything that you put in front of him. And I've started this new thing where I try to actually cook like actual meals every day. So I've been trying a lot of new recipes, and my child who eats everything is finished with his plate while the one who only wants chicken nuggets just stares at it. And so I'll say, you're really my favorite kid at dinner.
My dinner time favorite.
Because they will ask sometimes, like, Mom, if you had to pick one of us for your favorite, which one is it? And I said, I don't think I have a favorite. Do you think I have a favorite? And we kind of go through that. And so what I kind of started telling them was, you're all my favorites at different times. Because if I want to go get my nails done and go shopping, Hazel's definitely my favorite for that, because, the boys are not going to be into that. Yeah. If I want to go run around and get some exercise and energy, one of you is going to be my favorite for that, because Hazel's going to tell me that her throat hurts and doesn't want to run that much. So it's different times. So yeah. I do try to use that to my advantage. On a Saturday when one of them is sweeping and vacuuming the living room just because they want to, I'm like, hey, you're
That's my favorite
today. So yeah, and they know, or at least I think they know, we're, joking and it's all in fun, but yeah, do try to use it to my advantage. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good, and I do wonder a little bit to what degree I'm sort of creating that reality within my family system, because our family falls very strongly into like the stereotypical traditional birth order, in which my oldest, there's a meme that like you have one child that you would trust to stay home all weekend, clean up after themselves, eat vegetables, and like take care of the whole household, and you have another child who's not allowed to hold the umbrella, and they're in the same age range, and like that's my house. I mean, I think before we started filming, I was saying how there was a playground bully, and my oldest is trying to navigate it with words, while my youngest is trying to climb him like a spider monkey and choke him out like you would in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like we just have very different conflict resolution strategies. But something my husband and I are really intentional about is how much we narrate them outside of those individual events, because I also think kids become who you tell them they are. And so we really want to try to do a little bit more like learned or like planned ignoring when my youngest is just acting like a no limits crazy soldier. And we try to do a little bit more reinforcing when he is making responsible choices and things like that. Because I also think, I don't know, like when they're given that, like, oh, he's the wild child, he's the crazy one, he's the irresponsible one. I think like parents and caregivers often mean it in all the best ways, but I think also giving them that narrative over and over and over again can influence kind of their self-identity. But it is hard because I definitely have one kid that I'd leave home alone and another kid that's not allowed to hold the umbrella. And it's often not fair. Well, why is Silas allowed to do it? Because you tried to climb a ladder you found on the street. That's why. Like, he's allowed to do it because he didn't try to climb a random ladder. Like, that's why. But it's different.
Yeah, and I think it's like, how do you punctuate their strengths, right? Like, so...
Buddy, you're passionate.
Right, yeah.
Love that for you.
So, like, you'll climb over any mountain, literally. And so I think, like, you know, like... My youngest, like he's got good drive. He's a go-getter. He is like fearless, right? And he knows that like that sets certain limits for him. Like, I will not have you home by yourself. Like that's and you know, I think but then I will turn to you when I want an adventure. Like I want, like you were saying about your boys, like, yeah, like, let's go hiking. Let's go, like, he's my I'll turn to you because, like, I know that, like, you're also gonna, like, he's very, like, flat out about things. Like, so I know that you're gonna tell me, like, that shirt doesn't look good on me. And, like, so I might go to you. Or, like, when I need a laugh, like, he's got a lot of humor. You know, one time he told my husband, like, it's okay, like, everybody, he texted me that something that had happened in my home, and then he was like, it's okay, everybody makes mistakes. And it was like, it wasn't even a mistake that was made, but he's just my humor guy, right? And so, like, if I need a good laugh, I'll go to him. And then, like, each one of the kids kind of, like, play a different role, and they know that, like, you know, if you ask him, like, would your mom leave you home alone? He'd be like, oh, no. And, like, I don't think he would want to be home alone. I think he feels very connected with, like, us as family and as siblings. And then his siblings are like, so are you guys, like, gonna go to, like, dinner? Or, like, do you have, like, karate tonight? Do you have, like, because they're, like, fishing for that, like, alone time, right? And so I think that that's, like, when you talk about almost, like, the roles that the kids play, I think, you know, there's so many strengths and a lot of things. I've worked with a lot of families where they're like, these kids are a wild child, right? And like strength-based treatment. So you're like, in what ways are they like, how will they utilize those ways very well in the future, right? Like they're argumentative. They're going to make a great lawyer one day. And so like, how do you hone those skills? And I think, you know, getting the siblings to like, know each other's strengths, I think helps to like build that bond comparatively to almost like creating a fight between the two of them, maybe, or the three or four. Or many.
It's interesting. I don't know, and maybe because your gaps are different. So in my family, my boys are 2 years apart, 2 years and some change apart. And we are in a constant competition with one another. Like it is constant sibling rivalry. And it feels like as they've gotten older, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I think before we started recording, I told you that like my son passive aggressively picked a 7.5 minute long Japanese instrumental song, like just to like stick it to his brother. Like, it's like, do you even like Silent Moon, honey? And I don't think you do, but you're doing it just to get under your brother's skin. And right now we're just in a season where it's a lot of that. And so I guess it leads to my question of like sibling rivalry in general. Like, I notice it a lot in my family between my two boys, and I don't know if our genders were different or if they had different gaps. Would it be different? But I don't know. You've got, 3.5 in between?
Yep.
You've got 2 minutes in between. Is it better if I had a different gap or genders or what?
No. So when they were younger, one of the things that I did a lot, let me back up a second. So there's, Facebook groups are amazing, and there's some triplet groups that I joined, found out I was pregnant with triplets. I was like, yeah, let's get on here. So one of the things that Josh and I did was we would look at some of the issues that we call them older moms, and it just means their kids are older. What are some of the issues that they're having? One of them, and then once we found one, we were like, okay, what can we do with our kids to try to navigate them differently instead of that? Because a lot of times you'll see a problem and then people will say, oh, I don't have any advice, but I'm dealing with the same thing.
Yep.
Okay, how can I navigate away from that? One of the things was, especially in that 2 to 3 age, where you give somebody something, it's theirs and they don't want anyone to touch it, look at it, anything of the sort. So little things as simple as snack time. I would get the little snack cups and I would say to my daughter, here, give this to brother. And she would have to go and take it to whichever brother first. And then she would come back, fill up the second. Here, give this to your other brother. And she would do that. And after she dispersed snack, then she could have hers. So pretty much any time that we would give them things, we would always be like, here, why don't you give this to Christian first? Why don't you give this to his? Just to kind of get it in their heads that we're all going to get something. And so that kind of helped that. And that was great. When they were little and their minds were like Play-Doh and I could mold them, it was great. Now they're 9.
Fast at that point, right?
And right. And now they're 9 and they have their own minds that I am trying, but they are not as moldable anymore. So they are really at each other. So we have come up with creative solutions. I have my own sibling and I know from my childhood what worked and didn't work. So I'm like, all right, what can I do here? One of my favorite things to do, your boys are at an age where, I think we might have talked about this before, you might like this. If the boys, because they're the worst, so the sex might be different. They don't fight with Hazel as much and they fight with her differently, but it's still there. So if the boys are really at each other, I'll say, okay, have a seat at the table and get out a pen and a piece of paper. And they'll get out a pen and a piece of paper, and one of them will have to start, and he will write, once upon a time there was a dragon, period. And he will hand that to his brother. And then his brother has to say, and the dragon had bright green scales, period, and hand it back. And they have to fill the entire paper. It's getting them writing, it's getting them creative, and by the end of it, they are usually laughing
At each other.
And then when they get to the end, then they have to come and find me or my husband or both of us and read it to us. And they usually can't get through it because stories always take a silly turn and they're laughing and laughing. So that's one of the things. One of the other things that I found was really helpful for a while. Maybe I should do this again because it's kind of wearing off. I'm sure you've seen the piece of paper analogy where if you take a piece of paper and you ball it up and then you tell the paper you're sorry and you wrinkle it and try to smooth it out, you're never going to get the creases out. It's never going to be the same piece of paper. It's always going to have those wrinkles. No matter how much you tell it you're sorry, no matter how much you rub it and you try to be nice to it and make it better, you're just not.
Yeah.
Because words and actions have lasting, So we've done that. And they kind of giggled through it but they understood.
Yeah.
And they got it. So if they're really at each other sometimes, or sometimes if they don't think we're listening, they'll say some things that are less than kind. And it's normal. It's sibling rivalry.
Right.
But I'll say to them, hey, from the other room, hey, are you speaking life into your brother right now? Are those words uplifting? And they'll kind of roll their eyes and sigh, but they're like, and they make better choices moving forward. For me, as far as the sexes go, they fight with Hazel differently. Hazel really is into musicals and girly things. So sometimes if one of them is in a bad mood, he'll just say, I don't want to watch Wicked for the 4th time today. And so he'll pick a really big, huge blown up fight over what they're going to put on TV.
Yeah. Oh, we do.
So
We fight so much over the silliest little things, and what we're going to watch is number one, to the point where one of our family anchors in our household is that every Wednesday night we sit down as a family, we watch a movie. Parents put away phones, and we pick one thing and we watch it together. Starting this week, Mom picks the movie. I pick, because I am done for an hour fighting about what we're going to watch. So yesterday we're driving home from jujitsu and tomorrow's movie night. And they're I want to watch. My youngest really wants to watch Encino Man, which I didn't remember. And then I looked it up on Common Sense Media and I'm like, oh, that's not for a 7-year-old. Sorry, buddy. We will not be watching Encino Man. But my youngest is like, Encino Man. I'm like, how do you even know that's a fucking movie? And then my oldest wants to watch basketball or sports highlights or whatever it is. And they just fight over so it's gotten to the point where we can't give you a choice. Because if any choice comes to be, they almost pick the opposite of whatever their brother has picked. And I have discovered that when it escalates to a certain point, in my household, as I think you and I have talked about this as well, and I suspect you're in, there is a certain level of you figure it out yourself. If you guys want to fight and bang your heads into each other, that is a subsystem problem. Y'all sort it through. I'm not getting involved. If you'd like me to get involved, you may not be thrilled with how I become involved. So there is always a layer of hesitance to get me included. But
is this an adult-sized problem?
Is this an adult-sized problem?
In our house.
I like that. I'm going to steal that. But usually the question is, do you want mommy's help? And they look at each other, nope, we're good. We'll figure it out. Because usually mommy's help is oh, well, this game is gone now for the rest of the day. Or now the giant plastic sword that I don't know how it came into our house in the first place is in the top of my closet. I think it's still there, actually. But obviously sometimes it rises to the level that caregivers need to get involved or parents need to get involved. And for my house, it's when someone gets hurt, if I can hear the hit from the other room, that's a mom-sized problem. That's an adult-sized problem. And my recent consequence has been they have to support the other within their sports. So typically we don't make you do everything together. But if you hit your brother and then he leaves for jujitsu in the next hour and you are going to get to stay home and just hang out and relax, now you need to go and cheer him on. If we're going to hurt each other, we're also going to build each other up. And I have discovered that is the single most devastating consequence above losing iPads, desserts, literally any other. I have not seen my oldest cry harder than when I said, you will have to go watch your brother do jujitsu tonight and cheer him on. And he wept with the sadness of his ancestors. But where I sit, is this even a consequence? It obviously is. And it was a good one based on your reaction. But is this even a consequence if you can't to support each other? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it has to do with gender and age. So the boys are 3.5 years apart, and they still fight. But they only fight over common things, right? He took my V-Bucks. I want to watch this on TV.
We have 3,000 books in the house, but we
Yeah.
both want to read that book
Yep.
right now, even though we haven't looked at it in 2 years.
Yep. Or like he won't go outside and play football with me. Well, it is 20 degrees outside, so I can't blame him. And like so the boys definitely like they're kind of at each other. And then like so my youngest and he's 9, and then like my stepdaughter, she's 16, right? And so there's just a huge age gap between the two of them that like they don't really have much to fight over, right? Like everybody's got their chores, everybody's got their expectations in the household. Like there's really nothing for them to like fight over. And I just think it's because they're so different. Like she's working, she's like going to high school, she's like, all of those things. And like he's doing like sports and playing video games. Like so there's just like this huge age gap. Like she's into hair, he's into football. Like, it's just a lot of like that age gap. But the two boys who are still 3.5 years apart, because like then my middle child, he's 12, and then my stepdaughter's 16. Like they don't even fight either, because again, there's like nothing really for them to fight about.
What's the competition about?
Right. But the boys, same distance apart, have fought. Now they used to share a space, so they used to have to share a bedroom. And let me tell you how much they love that. Well, I think they loved it in some ways, because now we're getting into like where the younger one's like, I'm afraid of the dark, like his brother provided this like security for him, I think, at night. And he'll never admit that, right? He'll just make jokes about it all the time and like text me from his iPad at 9:30 at night, stuff like that. But like now they have their own space, and the conflict has definitely like gone down. So I think it also has to do with like just space. A lot of families that I've worked with, there's sometimes lots of kids, not a lot of space, blended families, intergenerational families living together, and it's like I mean, I'm a trained professional, and I'm like, how do I navigate this space? Like, right? Like, I just want to be like, just stop the fighting. Like, there's other things in the world to fight over than like, he has 2,500 V-Bucks and I have 500. Like, you spent your other ones, and he won't like, and I'm like, these are not like earth shattering problems. But I think it really had to do with like that competition, like you're talking about. Like, so it's competition over space, competition over like attention, competition over like achievement, and like what are they getting like gratification out of, right? Like, do they feel like they're winning in certain zones, or do they feel like they're like losing in a lot of zones? Because I notice a shift in my kids and their conflict too, when they feel like when they're struggling a little bit more in one area comparatively, like when we're just kind of like smooth sailing. And so I think it has to do with a lot of different factors when it comes to age and gender, space, attention.
Do you think there's anything that parents and caregivers can do to unintentionally make it worse? Because what I've noticed, at least in my own family system, just last night, they were fighting over what song we were going to listen to. And my go-to is to just ignore it. Like, I mean, I've been a forensic psychologist for 20 years. I can compartmentalize pretty good. So, like, if the world wants to fall down around me, I just kind of go into my head, and I'm just sitting here, like, riding along. Yeah. And my husband eventually looks at me. He's like, are you paying attention to this? Like, what do we do? And I was like, well, I wasn't paying attention.
I'm good.
I was here, but I wasn't here. And so then, but sometimes I just feel like let it run its course, ignore it, and it'll stop. And it often feels like the harder we work to turn down the volume, the louder it gets. So like yesterday I was like, all right, well then we're going to listen to Taylor Swift, which they both hate. And was my approach. Then when my husband's like, you must engage, I was like, fine, T Swift, let's do it. But I don't know. I think that there are ways in which we make that rivalry worse, and we don't even have insight to it. Yeah. And like you were talking about your kids having separate rooms now. Like each of my kids have their own room, but they choose to share.
Right.
And they have for 2 years. And there are times where I threaten to separate them because they won't get along. But then they both are like, no, we want to be with each other. Okay.
You turn one of their rooms into like another space, and they probably will be like, we want our own room.
I did go rounds on that when I needed an office, when I was like, I'm sick of being in the closet. Maybe I'll take one of their rooms. And my husband's like, the minute you do that, they're going to.
Yeah.
So we got rid of our guest room. But
Yeah.
As far as can we make it worse? Oh, we absolutely can. I will eat a piece of humble pie here while I share this with you. So, one of my children, I'm leaving my oldest one out here. We're just going to talk about the triplets for a moment. One of my children is how you said earlier about like if we constantly call them the wild one or this one. He's all those things. They are all those things. I'm not giving a clue which one's which. They are all those things. One of my children is, no matter where we go, if we run to Target for 20 minutes because we have to grab something quick, or if we go to the mall and we're shopping all day, this child will, at some point, maybe at many points, throw a fit about something. This child is a homebody. They want to be at home. They don't want to leave. And if you make them leave, you will deal with the wrath. So it is just not an enjoyable time to be out when you're running errands. Go out and do something fun. Kid's amazing.
Yeah.
So much fun. But when you have to go out and run errands, this is not the one that you want to be doing it with. And it was a particularly, I can't even talk, frustrating day. It just wasn't a great day. And as soon as I said the words and they were out of my mouth, I wanted to just suck them back. And I pointed to the other two and said, do you see how they're acting? Why can you not act like that? And he just kind of looked at me because that's not my norm. That's not, I try very hard. They were born minutes apart. It is very easy to compare them.
yeah.
But I try very, very hard to not do that. And like I said, as soon as I said it, I was like, and it wasn't the time to address it. It wasn't. I just was like, okay, what's done is done. Let's keep going. And when we got home, I sat with him and I did talk to him about it and, you know, kind of let him know where I was. But it was not okay to say that. And but in that moment, I had a lot of self-reflecting to do because they came out. The words came out.
Yeah.
I couldn't take them back. But if that was, now it's not, but if that was my habit, if I was constantly saying, why can't you act like them? Why can't you do that? Do you see what your sibling did? Why are you not doing that? In the same breath that you said we're going to tell them what kind of child they are, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to raise them up to know, and it's not true, but to know that they're not as good as that one. They're not. And I did a lot of self-reflecting, and I vowed to not do that again. And I haven't. But it was, yeah. So I think, and like I caught that right away, but in the same way that I caught that, I'm sure there's 10 things a day that I do that I don't catch that we are contributing to that.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike and I often joke about, like, so what do we think our kids are going to talk about in therapy when they grow up? Like, what will it be? And will it, and you know, it's never going to be that one time in Target where you're like, why can't you act like that? Like, it's not going to be that. It's going to be something completely beyond our sphere of awareness.
Yeah. I think losing your shit could probably make it worse.
Yeah.
Definitely make it worse. Where, like, you just matched a level of conflict, a level of intensity, like they're screaming at each other and like you just lose it. And I think because it just like, in our role as caregivers, and like we're gonna lose it, right? There's gonna be times like just get your shoes on, like I mean, because like mommy's gonna have big feelings, and like, you know, and but yeah, I mean, there's going to be moments where you lose it, but I think when it's like a conflict between siblings and you're trying to teach your kids, like, how do you resolve conflict, contributing to the conflict is probably not the way to start to like shift that, right? Like, it's really and maybe you go in with the level, like, something that I always do is like, hey, like, I get as loud. And then I'm like, what are we even fighting about? And, like, most of the time, they can't even bring it back to what they were originally mad at each other about, because it's just, like, compounds things, right? So it's like, he didn't pick up his shoes, or he didn't take the dogs out, but it's like, so, I mean, I think that, like, meeting that level of intensity in a way that, like, you just stay heightened is a way that, like, I think parents unintentionally contribute to it. Like, they just want it to stop, they want it to squash, they want to, like, move forward, and, like, who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, just get your shoes on. Like, it doesn't matter if your brother moved your shoe to, like, this part of the room. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, just get your shoes on.
Doesn't matter that he's looking at you while you're putting your shoes on. Just
Right.
ignore him.
Right, or that he ate the last, like, cherry Pop-Tart. Just eat the, like, eat the strawberry Pop-Tarts. Like, does it matter? And it does. Like, that's the thing, too.
Really
Like,
does
it
matter.
Yeah. And so when we lose our shit, I think that contributes at times to, like, the that competition, like you were both talking about, right? Like, so now, like, we're all competing, right? Like, we're all competing to win, and really, is, like, a parent, if we can just go in and, like, and there are moments, I'll tell you, like, where I'm like, I'm not ready to approach this yet, or, like, I'll go to my husband and I'm like, all you, like, may God be with you while you step into that space. But, like, I'm not going to contribute very much in a positive way to the space right now, because this is my fifth fire I'm putting out today.
Yeah.
And, like, vice versa, right? Like, sometimes, like, my husband's like, you're the patience of a saint. And I'm like, well, like, I've always worked with high risk clients. I've always worked with high risk families, right? And so, like, to me, it's like, it's a small problem on a broader scale of what I've worked, what the families that I've worked with. So I'm like, okay, like, you're fighting, hey, like, going, hey, like, what's happening? Like, and bring it down. So I think being inconsistent is also a way to that parents contribute to, can unintentionally contribute, like, the just ongoing, like, I am going to show up, I'm not going to show up, I'm going to scream and yell, I'm going to consequence, I'm going to, like, I mean, I think kids thrive off of consistency.
Yeah.
And so if, like, your kids know, if we have small problems, mom's going to give us the space to resolve them ourselves. But if we get aggressive, or, like, we get physical, like, then mom's going to step in. Like, that consistency, I think, is something that helps to kind of mitigate a bigger problem that's building.
What you mentioned there, and I had it on my list of different talking points to kind of touch on, is less about hovering in that space of inconsistency and unpredictability. And so, like, when siblings are raised together, at least something I've seen a lot professionally, and I hope that my own household does not carry the same level of chaos. But honestly, there have been moments during my child's upbringing that our family system is in a state of pretty significant chaos due to either loss we've experienced. The pandemic was no picnic for anyone. Like, that was a lot of chaos. There's a lot of different layers there. But I am curious about how, like, that growing up in chaos influences the sibling bond, because I have seen some siblings grow up in chaos and they almost have that, like, trauma bonded connectedness, like they are ride or die, you cannot split them. And then I've seen other one of my favorite things to do used to be family therapy with adult families. I loved it. There's never an ask for it anymore. I've not been asked to do it in a really long time, but I used to do that work pretty regularly, and I loved doing it because all these same narratives, like, that show up when we're 7 and 9 show up when we're 27 and 29, and why not address that now? But I guess I'm curious about this idea of the chaotic family system and the influence it has on those bonds. And in many ways, I've seen it be quite protective. But then also professionally, I've seen it be really dangerous to certain people. And I'm thinking, like, especially in the addictions world, like, growing up, they were your best friend, but they were also your first bad influence. And they were the first person that you did drugs with. And then they were the person that you developed a drinking habit with. And now they're your weekend warrior together. And now that you're trying to change your lifestyle, what once was such a huge protective factor now becomes a liability in your recovery. And like, I don't know, that's where the challenge of the sibling relationship really kind of lands differently with me.
Yeah. And I think to add like one more layer to that, it's when the perspectives of your upbringing vary so differently, right? Where it's like, well, I think we had a good upbringing, and the other siblings like we had a terrible upbringing. And so just kind of add a layer to that, I think that's an interesting dynamic. And Kim, like you said, like I would love to have like adult siblings come in and like, because I think that there's a lot of work and a lot of healing that can happen in that space.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine actually that was looking for therapy with their parent and their sibling recently, and obviously I can't do that kind of work. So I sent him to Bogusky, actually. I was like, yeah, maybe that'll work, but I don't know. I am curious about that trauma bond and dark humor. Like I feel like with siblings, at least like there's something there that you don't get that with anyone else.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so my sister's 7 years younger than me. Growing up, my dad always thought that one of us would put the other one in the hospital. What? So much. And then she graduated high school and went to college and became an adult. And I swear she changed when she went to college and became an amazing person. She says I changed when she went to college and that I became an amazing person. I don't know which one of us is right. Either way, we became the best of friends. And we laugh about our childhood now. So there's that. But as far as, I wouldn't say that we had a very traumatic childhood, but there's always things that could have been improved on.
Sure.
And with me being 7 years older than her, there was a lot of things that we ventured more towards the protect.
Yeah, that was always
I
my
felt
role.
like I had to protect her from everything. And as the older sister, even now, it's very hard for me to let go of that. She's married, has her own family. We live two very separate lives. And sometimes I'm sure that there are times where she was like, you can go a little bit. I still have that urge to protect her.
Yeah.
And then as far as how that transfers into my parenting, that is something where I work very hard. It's one of my like personal motherhood goals, I guess you could say, that I want my kids to feel that. I want them to be protective over each other and be there for each other out of just wanting to do that, not out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
So that has definitely, that's one thing that that's really played a role. There were times where I definitely felt like it was my responsibility to protect her and look out for her. Even if it wasn't, I'm saying my perspective at that time was, I need to do this.
Yeah.
And that's something that has really, really played a role. I want my kids to know. I will say to them, there are times where they'll come to me and they'll be like, do you know, my daughter snitched her brother out. Do you know that yesterday when he was trying to pack his lunch, he tried to put in 3 snack foods? I told him that you weren't going to go for it. So he made better choices, but do you know that? And in that moment, I was very proud of her because she stepped up to him. But I also had to remind her, I'm really proud of you for that. But you're not his mom. Like, you really should worry about you in the morning. Let me worry about him. If it's ever anything that's concerning, let me know. But, good job for helping to make good choices. But you do have to remember here, Same thing, one of the boys came up and was telling me something the other day that just wasn't a good choice. Wasn't a big deal. I don't even remember what it was. Yeah. I just remember the situation. And I said, who are you? He said his name. And I said, and who is he? And he said his name. And I said, so which one should you be worried about? So,
Yeah.
and I also try to make sure that they don't ever have that trauma to bond over. A very, very good friend of mine, a very wise woman, once told me, your kids are going to, it's kind of backing off what you said about therapy, your kids will inevitably be in therapy because of something that you've done.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Breathe
It's just
deeply,
a matter
accept your
of
fate.
what.
Yeah.
And, that came up, we were just talking, and it was a very lighthearted conversation. But that is something that I think about often. When one of my kids spills something all over the table, I'm like, is this going to be a therapy moment? Okay. Just breathe a second. Okay. Let's get some paper towels. And so, like, as little and silly as that sounds, and it was, it definitely helps. But so that's where I am with trauma bonding with siblings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in my professional work, I've worked with a lot of families where like the kids have gone through a lot together and they have a bond that's been built. And I think sometimes it definitely skews the roles. Like, I think we're all talking about like, we work so hard to like make sure like our kids aren't like, I raised my younger siblings or I like, and unfortunately, like due to adversities that a lot of our families face, like that is the narrative for a lot of the kids, and it's like, well, I raised my siblings because like my mom had to work like 3 different jobs in order to be able to like put food on the table and a roof over our heads, and so I think like I think perspective is important. And then also like just being able to like talk about it. Right. And like, so like, I think, our kids are going to experience things in their lives that like, whether like we had control over it or not. And like to stop that, like almost stop that trauma bonding where it's like, yeah, like we experienced like some hard things together. And like who was there in the end, like who protected us, who like I think where it becomes like that trauma bonding is when it's like they felt like they could only protect each other. Like there wasn't an adult in the system that could step in and like protect them. And yeah, I just like how you say, like, I think about that too, like, what will our kids be laying on a couch like, talking about, or like the like what like what will be like their story to like their significant other, like what will be the like the first night that they like drink alcohol and they're like, whoa, like are they gonna be one of those people like tell a story in that way, like and but I think like there's a level of like, yeah, like this happened, right? There's things that are completely out of our control. And my sibling was there, which was really freaking cool. Like I could turn to my sibling and I could say like, hey, this thing happened, or we experienced it together. But like there was this adult in the system, and like this person also stepped in and was like, I love you, I care about you guys, like, and I'm gonna provide like that safety and security. But yeah, I've seen a lot of family. I've seen intergenerational patterns, right?
Yep.
Where it's like I have a really close relationship with my sibling because like we both like experienced this really tough thing in our childhood, and like it's bonded us. But like, man, like we don't know how to break that pattern. Like here we are with our kids trying to navigate a world that we haven't healed from, and now we're trying to like raise our kids in a world where they don't have to heal from the world that they've been raised in.
I think that as you were talking, I was thinking about my own experiences as a sibling growing up. And so I was the oldest in the birth order, but I also had a very significantly disabled sibling who was nonverbal. He had Down syndrome and autism. And so I often fell into the role of caretaking for him. And then as we entered into adulthood, none of that changed. Like he still needed and was developmentally like 1. So he still needed the same level of care at 26 as he needed at 1. And so never did our roles or dynamics really shift because it always was like I had to take care of him. And that was in many ways kind of how I was not that there were plenty of like adults in the system to caretake, but it was always like I can tell you, like every fight I got into in elementary school was in protection of him. The kid that I would bark at on the school bus was in protection of it. Like, I don't know, kids are mean in the 90s when it comes to kids with developmental disabilities. So a lot of my role was like protecting him and standing out, but that never changed. but the dynamics of our relationship never changed. But it's always really interesting to me seeing adult family systems. And so like a show that I absolutely love, and y'all should watch it if you haven't, it's called Bad Sisters. And it's about 5 sisters that I won't give too much away. It starts out at the funeral, but they murder one of the sisters' husbands because he's abusive and terrible. But it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. But it's not a whodunit. Well, it's a whodunit. It's a whodunit, and how was it done? Like, it was done. You start out at the funeral, but then you go into the different sibling dynamics. But as it unfolds, you start to notice that these developmentally normative adults all still are deeply entrenched in these different familial roles, despite the fact that and none of them had developmental disability, right? Like, and there's like one scene that really stood out to me where the oldest is like screaming at the youngest, like who's probably 28, like older 20s, like, why are you still such a fuck up? Why do I always have to take care of you? Da, 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 da. And I mean, how many times have I've had that therapy session with someone else, like trying to break those patterns, trying to break those different layers. And personally, professionally, I just see those patterns that we get so stuck in while we're growing up, and then we just stay in them ever more. And I don't know. And I don't have any lived experience to know any different because nothing changed in my relationship. But I feel like in others, like, aren't there cues? Does anything change, or are we just destined, like predetermined to play those roles in our family forever?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I know for my sister and I, like I said, like I've always been the protector. She's always she's younger, so she's kind of just gone along with it. So now I still feel the need sometimes to protect her subconsciously. Like, we're sitting here and we're talking. I don't need to be like, hey, I got to go because I need to go put my cape on and go save my sister today. But subconsciously, if she calls me just to chat and is like, I'm dealing with this, the neighbor is, their fence and blah, blah, blah. She doesn't even have a fence. But I'm thinking in my head, who can I call that can install a fence? And I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't actively think I need to go save my sister. But in my head, I am still, like, subconsciously, I'm still very much like, I'm the older sister. I'm in charge. I always have been. And so there are some other things I was really bossy.
You?
Sister. I was a little bossy. So there are times where, again, we will chat. I'm going to kind of throw her under the bus here, but we'll chat. And sometimes texts are real bad. Sometimes there will be like some misunderstanding in tones through text.
Yeah.
Like, I'll say something and I mean it like really with all kindness. Like, I'll talking about my niece, like, oh, hey, don't forget to size up on her boots. She told me her boots were a little tight. Don't forget to size up. But because of our past and how we grew up, even though I'm not like this anymore, she's not like that anymore, she very well may read that text as me telling her, like, don't forget, you need to get your kids some boots. And again, it's all subconscious. Now, we have grown a lot as people, and so that was a silly example. But there's a chance she would just laugh it off and be like, are you telling me what to do? Whatever.
Yeah.
So that's why I say I think it's a little bit of both. So yes, you do grow. It does shift a little bit, but subconsciously, I think it's still there.
Yeah.
Those patterns are entrenched.
just-
And I see it throughout my family system. I see it throughout friends, and that everyone seems to be stuck in these same patterns. And due to my more unique lived experience in that space, it just never shifted for me. And then I was like, like, you're still the oldest is always taking care of the youngest in this family system. And it's like,
Yeah.
but or I've done therapy with folks, and it's like, oh, how old's your sister? 47? I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that maybe now would be a good time for her to start to be responsible for her mortgage. Would we? No, like I can't not care, like almost this compulsive caretaking that.
Yeah, and I think to normalize it in some ways, if it's functioning, right? If if it's working, then we don't need to break it, right? But it's when it's not working.
Yeah.
Right? When one sibling or a group of the siblings are going out on all these limbs, and they're really putting themselves in a spot, whether it's like financially or emotionally or physically, whatever it is, to like protect another sibling, like that creates like the dysfunction, right? And like it creates the distress. But like, I mean, there are probably a lot of family systems out there where like one sibling is kind of like the overwatcher. And I think, Kim, before we started the podcast, we had talked about when somebody, like when there's like a parent loss, right, in the family system, and the challenge that poses, right? And so if just the caregiver kind of holds the power and like holding the system together, I think quickly the system can like crumble after the loss of a caregiver, right? Like a parent. And so then on the flip side of that is like, if there's like this shared responsibility and shared narrative that's functioning, where it's like, well, yeah, like everybody turns to like the older sibling when like they need a shoulder to cry on, and they also like share that responsibility with the parent, and they share it with like the spouse, and they share it, like there's all these different like layers. I think when it becomes problematic is when it's like you're the person who's like holding everything together, and like God forbid something happens to you and like the bottom drops out, and then it's like now all these members of your family are kind of like lost. So I think there's like a level of like normality to like everybody having a role. It's just like, when is it not functionable and at what level? And like life events will happen, right? Like throughout our entire life, like life events will happen, and it's going to challenge systems in so many different ways, adult systems, kid systems, intergenerational patterns. And to throw like one more thing out there, like into like roles and functioning, like throw addiction into the center of it, and throw addiction into the center of it. And I think that really like stirs up a system. And I've seen a lot of families who grew up in patterns of in certain roles, and then they carry that into their own families, even if they've detached from their family system, like their family of origin system.
They keep
And
that
they just,
same
like,
role.
yeah. And so I just love when I'm working with families, I've done my own like assessments, right? Of like my genogram, my eco maps, like all of the assessments. So that way I could like understand for myself what my lived experience looks like, but also then for families like, oh yeah, like look at this. And oftentimes families, because you're in it, right? Like, I mean, it's even just like this podcast today. You're sitting in it, you're just talking, and then you like, you're gonna go back later, and you're gonna be like, oh, like love that, like, you know, and all those pieces. Like, but when you're in it, it's hard to see it, and so I just love the use of like some kind of assessment, or like the wise person who comes in and is not part of your family system, and they say like, "Did you ever notice this?" And you're like,
No, I actually hadn't.
now this is going to cost me a $60 copay every other week. Thank you. Yeah.
No, I think, and I love that you touched. I think whenever we're in those really high stakes situations, so I would put like deaths, births, and weddings, like when it's those big shifts in the family system. I feel like it is either the most beautiful thing I get to witness as a professional. Like I get to see these beautiful families, these folks that have maybe always struggled with their expression of their emotion, but this huge loss like allows them to have this massive breakthrough. And it's just this amazing demonstration of love and caring for each other. Or people show up as like next level psychopaths. And it's like, you're not like that. Like, you're not like this in any other context. But I mean, I can think of times like in my own family or friends, clients that I have worked with, that the battle over the inheritance meant that no one got anything because we paid it all in legal fees. And it's like, so do you want to, like, so you would just rather him not have it then? Is that the plan here? Like, but I don't know. It just seems to bring out the best and the worst in family systems. And I think some of those old patterns, whether they be loving, kind, like deeply entrenched in attachment, or like that competitive scarcity mindset, I feel like it shows up in that space so much more frequently than anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree. There's always a healthy level of competition.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, I really like what my sibling got. Adults, kids, at any age, right? Like, okay, how do I achieve that thing, right? And so I think we can also like play into a system where like there is a healthy level of like competition, a healthy level of like bonding over like lived experiences. There is like, yeah. So and then the real test will be when major life events happen, and is this superficial, or is this like truly entrenched into like our attachment and our bond?
Why is it, so one of the data points when I was prepping for today that showed up pretty regularly that I thought was interesting, is that sibling relationships tend to improve over time as we get older. So kids that were less close within the household tend to have closer relationships later in life. But there's no real explanation as to why that data point would be present. And I would almost think you're closer when you like live in a house together, and as everyone goes out and does their own thing. But I guess there's a fair amount of research that says people identify as being closer to their sibling into their 20s and 30s and beyond, and it shifts in that way. And again, I don't have any lived experience with this. And the families that I work with are the ones that are not feeling close in those later years, right? So I don't get to see those. So it was an interesting data point for me. And I don't know if y'all have any thoughts about it.
So, I mean, that's kind of my story. It's exactly what happened with my sister and I. And growing up, we weren't close because we're 7 years apart. So I was 10, she was 3. We didn't have.
What do you have in common?
She would come in my room and drive me crazy, and I would try to take advantage every chance I could. I remember one of the stories she loves to tell is how I would let her go shopping in my room. I don't really remember this, but it sounds like something that I would do, so I am not discrediting her. I am just simply saying I don't remember it. I am not saying it didn't happen. But I was the cool big sister, so she would want some stuff. So I would let her come in, and she would pick out some things for $1 or $2 or whatever. Sounds like tell Silas about that.
Yeah,
so
he would.
That's we weren't really close. Once I moved out, had a baby, and kind of started living my adult life. She was still a child. So I would go on to say, take this even a step further. My husband and my sister have such a close relationship because she was still a child.
When he came into the picture.
Yes. And so he is as much of a brother to her, as a brother would be. But when you're an adult, you're looking at things differently. You're growing, you're maturing, your siblings are growing, your siblings maturing. So it's just a completely different dynamic. I would wonder if there was more studies on the parent-child relationship, because it's kind of the same thing. Like a teenager, before the podcast started, you told us earlier that one of your teenagers gets in the car. As soon as they get in the car, they put their earbuds in because they are not here for it.
Yeah.
And we didn't have those types of earbuds when we were teenagers,
Right.
but I would be willing to bet that if we did, we would do the same thing.
I would have definitely done that.
But now as an adult, like I unfortunately lost my father last year, but before his passing, we were the best of friends. Like we were so close. So it's kind of the same thing. There's probably more research out there on parent-child versus the siblings, like you said. But I think a lot of it is just you're growing, you're evolving as a person. There are certain things that aren't going to bother you as much. If your sibling comes to your house and is like, hey, can I borrow a sweater? Chances are, as an adult, you're going to be like, yeah, do you want black or gray?
Right.
Whereas when, you're just 14, 15, 16, and your sister comes home from school and is wearing your sweater, you're going to react to that a lot differently.
Yes.
Or if you're my kids, I was just about to put on that sweater. Both of them. Yes. Now they're walking around with 2 sweaters on because...
Yeah.
And I'm going to use your kids here. I'm willing to bet that when they are old enough to start driving and doing things on their own, some of the best things that their most fun experiences will be going to concerts and shows and things like that together. Right now, they're fighting over 7-minute Japanese instrumentals in the car.
Silent Moon.
So, yeah. So as they grow, but I bet that's something that we're going to have to revisit this in 10 years and see where we are as far as their journeys. But I'm willing to bet that's something they will bond over.
And I mean, my husband will say that he and his siblings are so much closer in adulthood than they were as kids. And they didn't have conflict as kids. They just all kind of had their own. His oldest sister is a half sister, so she was in a different household part of the time, so maybe contributed to some of that. But his younger brothers, 2 years, like they've got the same age difference as my boys. They were into all the same things. They lived in the same house. They had the same parents, but they would describe themselves as very distant. And they were very temperamentally different in high school as well, which probably contributed to some of that. But now in adulthood, like his brother and his sister, like his brother's his best friend, and he and his sister are incredibly close now. And so it was an interesting data point, because I would have thought that like if you were close when you were younger, you'd be close in adulthood, and if you were less close, you'd be less close. But what the research really suggests is we get closer to our siblings as we age.
I wonder if it has to do with the system too, right? Like,
I'm
so as a
sure.
systems thinker, right? I'm sitting
It's
here
always the
thinking
system.
about, right? Like there's more people to fulfill those needs, right? So it's not like we're competing over the same parents. Like now we have like our own spouses, we have our own children, we have our own friend group, we have like we still share the same point, right? Of like contact with like parents, and there are things that parents give that all these other people in the system can't give, right? But your system's bigger and it's more accessible as a kid, or sorry, as an adult than when you were a kid. Like you relied on your parents to like buy you the things you needed, or to provide the meals that you needed, to give you the things that you wanted. And like now as an adult, it's like, okay, now I have my job does that, right? Like now I go out and I make my own money, and I'm not relying on my parents to like provide my needs. Like I have a spouse who meets some of my emotional needs. I go and have fun with my kids. So I just think like the system is a lot different. So it's not as much of like kind of going back to that like competitive point, and especially if you don't have a lot at that point, right? Like a parent who doesn't have a lot to give, for whatever reason it might be, there's more conflict over like the getting your needs met than like when you get older and you're able to meet your needs. But I would say in enmeshed families, where the enmeshment carries on into adulthood, the relationship probably stays pretty parallel to what it was in the, like.
I bet that's true.
The lack of there's still that lack of like resources and individuation and all of that occurs in that like late teen, early adulthood.
And distance is still perceived as threatening, or
Right.
some of those different pieces.
Yeah. But if that enmeshed caregiver, like dies, right? Then that's when you see like the bottom fall out. And you see some
You do.
true like some true grief in a lot of different ways. Like it just shows up. I can think about like some cases that I've worked with, in my professional, and I've seen in my personal life, where it's like the bottom falls out and it's like, I don't even like, there's no way to catch my footing. And so then it really impacts the sibling relationships.
How do y'all think we can work to resolve childhood conflicts later in life? I've worked with a lot of families over the years that have been having the same fight for 20 years, or the same resentments kind of infused between or across the siblings, or they're still stuck in those same roles or behavioral patterns. And I can think of one family in particular that I worked with. I mean, it was back in grad school, but it was an older, they were probably in their like 20s-ish by the time they came through my office, so like 25, 23, like emerging adulthood. But, and then the mom came in for family therapy because her kids still just couldn't get along. And ultimately what had occurred is the younger sister had been, very unfortunately, had been assaulted in the absence of the knowledge or understanding of the older brother, but she resented him for not stopping it. But he wasn't able to stop it, but that was just like the family narrative, is that she was hurt, he didn't stop it, he carried all this guilt and shame for it. She continued to have resentments over his inability to protect her in that space. And we spent a lot of time kind of working through the shoulds and what should have happened and supporting him in navigating his own grief and guilt associated with it, supporting her in finding forgiveness while also being angry at the person that hurt her versus him for his inability to protect her. And I mean, they were 2 years apart. I think she was 9 and he was 11. You know what I mean? Like, it was a very traumatic belief, right? It was a belief formed in trauma that when you really start to evaluate and bring it into the light, it doesn't track in reality. Yeah. But it had impacted this family for like 15 years until finally the mom was like, no, we're going to family therapy as an adult. I don't know. I just found myself wondering, like, how do we, short of family therapy, because people don't do it anymore in adulthood. They used to, but they don't do it anymore. I don't know. What are some mechanisms or what are ways that people can heal these old, and a big part of our work in that space was we will never agree on what happened because they both continued to have very different memories of that day, the events leading up to that day, the events in the aftermath of that day. They just had very different recollections. And mom had a third recollection, right? We were never going to arrive at a shared narrative, but they had fought over the narrative for like 15 years, and it's colored all of their interactions. And I really applaud that mom because I think we were able to get some good work done and really unhook from the stuck points. But with so many folks just not interested in family therapy with their adult families. A lot of people do family therapy with their own kids or spouse or whatever. That's quite popular. But how do we unstick from that in the absence of therapy?
I'm a detacher. So, and this is probably not the right answer. But depending
we listen, we don't judge here on the pod, Tiff. We listen, we don't judge.
Now that one, especially when there's like trauma or any assault there, like that puts a whole different spin on it.
Sure, yeah.
Depending on the situation, if it's, I'm gonna use an example that's not as heavy. A car, if my brother were to drive my car, and when he gives it back to me, there's chocolate milkshake spilled all over the front seat, and I'm very upset about it, and that's the hill that I'm going to die on because he says that he didn't even have a milkshake, right? A lot less heavy.
Yeah.
But so if that's what it's going to be, and now I'm finding out, it's 6 years have passed, and he's still dwelling on this, and I'm still insisting about it, and there's no way we can get along, and it's causing a rift in the rest of the family, and we can't even get together for Christmas anymore.
That's how this family ended up.
Like those types of situations at some point, and I'm a lot more strict in this since having my own kids because I don't want them to deal with some of the uncomfortable situations that I had as a child within my own family, like turbulence. But if it's that big of a deal and if it's that dangerous and it's that, when we try to get together for Christmas that everybody's miserable, I'll excuse myself. Because I'm not going to go out of my way to put myself and my family and my kids in there. I don't want my kids growing up with an example of this is what we do. And we stick around because it's family.
Yeah.
I would much rather teach them healthy, even if hurtful, healthy boundaries. So again, if you're going to ruin my car and insist that you didn't, and it's to the point where we both can't be in our mother's home, I will politely bow out. Yeah. I will protect, I'm at a point in my life where I need to protect my children and I need to protect my peace and I need to protect their peace. We can try therapy. absolutely. You said outside of therapy, but if that's an option, I'll absolutely try that with you. We'll see if we can, whatever. And if it gets to a point where I'm like, I know you ruined my car, and you're like, you know that you didn't ruin my car, we can agree. I'm loving this example. We can agree to disagree and try to move forward. But unfortunately, if I'm a detacher, if it can't, and that we're both dying on that hill, I will politely remove myself. I will bow out of the battle.
Yeah, I think where a lot of families struggle and kind of just like throw fuel on the fire is they try to solve it over like text or through somebody else, right?
That's
And
the one.
They don't just like sit in the space and just talk about it, right? And it's like, okay, everybody has a different point of view, right? Like, we're all going to leave this space today and have a different point of view. Like, that's okay. And like being able to accept that, I think is really important. But like, okay, all of that, like, that's the content, right? Like, and so, but the being able to hear out the other person's like feelings, right? Like I felt unsafe. I felt scared. I felt, disrespected. I felt, and like, I think it's harder to, push that out, right? Like the I statements. I work with a lot of families, right? On like I statements, like I felt scared when this happened. And it's really hard to kind of go against that, right? Because it's like it's what they were feeling. It wasn't like you made me feel scared. Well, I didn't make you feel scared. Like it wasn't scary for me, but like I felt scared when this happened. There's an ownership in like kind of your own experience, and I don't think again, like I think it goes back to the competition where it's like somebody's got to win, somebody's got to be like the winner in this, and I think that that's where families really come at this like crossroads, and then they just they just kind of keep adding fuel to the fire because it's like, well, yeah, but like what about this one time when you did this, and so setting the boundary, like if you're going to talk about it and you're sitting in a space where you're going to talk about it, like we're only focusing on this one thing because like nobody's going to sit there for 10 hours and do a therapy session like in their own home without a therapist successfully throwing everything out on the table at once. And so I think acknowledging the ability to or acknowledging that other people can have different feelings, right? Like I could look at something and be like, that was like nothing. What are you talking about? Like it didn't matter that didn't matter to me in our childhood. But like it really mattered to like my sibling, right? And it's like, okay, like I can accept that that's your narrative, and accept it, not be like, now I've totally switched my narrative. And yes, that's, and so I think outside of therapy, that's probably like talking about it face to face, and putting kind of that I and emotional spin on it or the feelings based spin on it. I think that therapy, I mean, obviously I'm biased,
Yeah.
but I think that therapy is an effective tool to have that mediator in the middle, because even if you pull in a family member or you pull in somebody who wasn't there, they have some skin in the game, right? They're going to have to drive home with somebody, or they're going to have to show up to Christmas, or they're going to have to there's still that bias that's going to be present. But as the therapist, you shouldn't have a bias, because you're showing up as kind of that neutral person
For the system.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned that, I'm mindful of the time. So here at the How to Be Happy Hour, we accept questions for our panel. And something you said led me to one of the questions that was submitted. And of course, now I moved away from it. Oh, should you always mend the relationship? According to my research, there is a rise in both sibling and parental estrangement in the United States. I have my own opinion as to why I believe it might be occurring. I think that we are becoming increasingly less tolerant of differences of opinion and differences of perspective. And I think if your beliefs don't always align with mine, then I'll cut you out of my algorithm, and that I get to otherwise like perfectly cultivate what's in my worldview. And so I think we are just less tolerant and less attuned to that repair following a rupture in general. And I have worked with clients that distance from their siblings or distance from their caregivers or distance from that weird uncle that they only see at Christmas, but they've decided I'm not going to go to Christmas anymore because I don't want to see that weird uncle. They are better off in the absence of that relationship. They are safer. They do have greater levels of peace. They are safer in their recovery, or maybe their own traumatic experiences need to heal and can only do so in the absence of that person. So, I mean, I'm all about protecting our peace. I'm all about boundaries. But I do wonder if estrangement is the right path as frequently as folks are choosing to take it in this current, like, cultural climate.
I think it's a very loaded question with multifacets. You know, for the silly example I gave with the car, I don't really know estrangement would be the best.
Never speak to you again over this milkshake.
I mean, I guess it depends on how much you love your car.
I'd just be upset you didn't share your milkshake with me.
That's what I'm saying, and that's a valid point. So, in that situation, you're going to want to try to resolve things, especially if it's a close family member. Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side of that, like you had mentioned earlier, Mel, about when you throw addiction right smack dab in the middle of it, that changes everything.
Yeah.
So you can have a very close family member who it's truly not healthy for you to keep them in your line of sight. I've always said there's a fine line between supporting and loving and enabling. Mm-hmm. And my personal opinion, if you have somebody in your life who is, whether they're dealing with addiction or whether they're just dealing with narcissism, if they're constantly, whatever they're dealing with, whatever they have going on, if that's constantly affecting you and your peace and your cloud, at some point you have to make that decision to set those hard boundaries. So I'm going to take it a little lighter in the parenting realm. And as far as my kids, I encourage them to set boundaries with each other all the time. Now, they're 9, and my oldest is 23, so obviously they're not at a point where they're going to be like, I'm never talking to you again. They have said that.
Mine have said it too.
Right. But actual estrangement, like, they're not quite there yet. Yeah. But there are times, I have one of my little guys is a little harder on toys than the others. So there are certain toys that the other two are like, you know, you may come to my room and hang out. I don't want you to touch that. And if he touches it, they will say things like, I'm sorry, but you're not allowed in my room right now. Like, we can try, this is something I say to them. We can try again next week. But for the rest of the week, you're not going to, whatever it is. So they'll use that same verbiage. You know,
I'll try this again next week.
We can try this again, but for this week. And then, of course, then they come to me, Mom, is this an adult-sized problem? Yeah, they won't let me in their room. And I'm like, okay, it's mom-sized problem, so here we go. Let's talk about this. Why are you not allowed? Well, I touched their toy. Okay. Did they ask you not to? Yes. Okay. Did you make the conscious choice to still touch it? Yes. Okay. It's their bedroom, and they can offer those consequences. And so it's tough. But I am proud of them, even at such an early age, to make those boundaries. They make clear and concise requests with the boundaries then put in place. So even in that sense, I think there are times where that's just what's going to be necessary. And it might hurt. It might really hurt. And this goes as far as, I'll go with the sibling relationship, parent relationships. There are friendships that are the same thing where it hurts. But it's the same exact line. You have to have that line. And sometimes, like, that might not be your first. Hopefully it's not your first line of defense, but there are times where it just has to happen.
And And I think there's boundary, like there's a lot of different ways in which we can set boundaries as well to maintain safety. And so I like that you alluded to like different layers of intervention. Like we have a family member in our family system that struggles with their disease of addiction pretty actively. For a season, we did no contact. We're now in a different season where our plan is we will have contact with you in the morning, but once you start to seem impaired, we're out, we're done. And so that's our current model. And so far that seems to be working. But I do find myself thinking about as we start to see like more estrangement or some of those different pieces kick in, it's still, I don't know, you have to be safe, right? And so when addiction's at place or if, I've worked with a lot of family systems in which one sibling has abused the other, witnessed abuse to the other, perpetrated against the other, has done some pretty serious harm. I would say in those spaces, my emphasis is always more like, I don't know, victim-led reunification is the model. And so my goal is to always empower whoever has experienced the greatest level of hurt in that space to be the one to sort of set the pacing and tempo for reconnection, if that's in the cards at all, and it not always is. But when I'm thinking about just more normative ruptures in relationships, I don't know, I find that there's probably more nuance there than we see in general practice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when it comes to like safety and like physical and psychological safety, it's important to assess like the need to set the boundary, to maybe disconnect. And so I agree with everything that you're saying, and like add just a little piece to it. I think it's also I think there's a self-reflection moment too for like if you're the one who's kind of separating from the family or somebody is separating from the family, it's like how distant have I gotten from everybody? Right? So is it a me thing or is it a like no, this truly is like a family systems thing, or I need to like create safety. So if you find it like you've now separated from your family and your best friend and your job and your neighbor and you're like, and now you just find yourself like alone on this little island, it's like that might be a moment to self-reflect. And but if it's like, no, I need to separate from like these certain individuals, right? And I think it's what is your intention? Is your intention again like safety? Is it like physical, psychological safety? Or is it like I'm gonna do this because I know it's gonna hurt this person? And I've seen a lot of family systems where it's like, well, you can't see my kids or I won't talk to you or whatever because I want to hurt you. And like oftentimes it's like nobody's to actually own.
Weaponized estrangement
Yes.
almost.
Yeah. And so I think it's what is the intention behind the separation as well.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that you mentioned in there that got me to thinking, I think what my family had discovered is that as we increased the boundaries with that one specific family member, it also impeded our access and connection to all the other family members within that particular subsystem. And so we started to realize, like, early on, we were like very principled. We're like, no, we're not going because we want to make a stand. And then we started to realize though, but we're missing out on all these opportunities for connection and all these really special things. And so like, I think boundaries are essential and really important to like setting and maintaining our peace. But the inverse of that is also like at what cost? Like when we have those boundaries, and what we discovered in our family was that the boundaries that we were setting was impeding other really important relationships. And while they were protective, they may have been too protective. They were protecting us from all of it. So one of the other questions that was submitted for today, and it's sort of a sidestep of that exact same one, but how would you or how should we approach instances where the sibling relationship is a source of ongoing stress, distress, or trauma within a family system? Or what would be or what would y'all suggest in that zone?
Well, again, because I'm biased towards therapy, I think, like getting that mutual, or like getting that neutral sounding board in like in therapy, right? Like, so is it again like a me thing? Is it like, and outside of like not doing family work, right? Not doing work with the sibling, but I think it's like do I need to heal from my own things before I can like approach this? Is it that like I need to set boundaries, or I don't know how to set boundaries, right? So like once I open this door, I don't just like crack it open, I kick it wide open, and it's like this flood of things that like have happened previously, or and then I carry it really heavily, and then I just do things that that hurt me and hurt my peace, right? Or is it things like I need to heal from, and in order to be able to have the relationship with a sibling, if it's ongoing, so it's like, these things have happened in our childhood, they're now happening in our adulthood. Again, I think it's like that work, and I mean, you could probably, work through 10 self-help books, with a lot of great ideas, but I think just having that neutral person who's going to look at it in like, the bigger viewpoint, and look at kind of all of the things rather than just this singular relationship.
It's funny because I already know your answer to this question that was submitted, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any specific family therapy models that work well for resolving sibling conflict?
Well, I think so, Kim. It's
Go
called,
on, Melanie.
it's called ecosystemic structural family therapy. And so, just looking at, again, like the full system.
Yep.
Right? It's not placing blame, shame, and judgment on one singular individual, one singular event, one singular thing. Like, it's not just healing is not just going to happen through like, let's just hash this out, right? It's going to be, what are all the things around you, and working with all the subsystems. So what role did the parent play in it? What role does like your spouse now play in it? Like, are they like your hype man? Like, they're like, oh yeah, like you get in the car after a family event and they're like, yeah, I saw that too, and it's like, everybody's like mad.
And another thing.
Right, yeah, and like, cause that doesn't promote healing, right? And there's a time and place for that, and we've all probably been in those situations where we're like, okay, like we both like saw the same thing, right? And we're both, like, we can't wait to get in the car, like we kind of give each other like the it's, once we get in the car, we're gonna have a good laugh, like whatever it is, right? But like, I think it doesn't just happen just by like hashing it out, right? Like, I think bringing in truly like the full system around what resources, like what does your own self-care look like? How do you take care of yourself outside of relationships? Like, relationships are dynamic, right? You're gonna have like, you could have the best day in the whole wide world with this person one day, and then the next day something happens, right? And so like, how, like what resources, what tools do you have in your toolbox? So I think ecosystemic structural family therapy is probably, and then EFT, right? So I think EFT can also just help by looking at those moments of hurt, right? And creating a narrative about it, and being able to, again, just like talk about the thing, right? And talk, not text. I think you live in a world where there's a lot of like texting that happens, and a lot gets lost in translation.
So I guess as we wrap up here, my last question for you both is, what is your favorite part of the sibling relationship, whether it be your own relationships, watching it within the family systems that you've served, or watching it in the humans that you've been called to raise? What is the part of the sibling relationship that sparks joy for you?
So I would say for me and my sibling relationship, it would be getting my sister to be who and what we missed growing up to her own family. Like I said, we didn't have like a crazy traumatic childhood, but there's always things you would yearn for. So getting to see her as an adult and getting to see her be a rock star mom, like it's
To also multiples, right?
she does. So she has a single child and then she had twins. So I stayed the one upper. She tried to be like me, didn't quite get it.
Still one.
I just want to, for the record. But yes, she does have twins, so she's a mom of multiples as well, and she just rocks it. And so getting to be on the outside looking in, and I still have that protectiveness where I want to like jump in, but I don't need to. And getting to see that, and getting to see, like, I know what it feels like to break generational curses, but to watch my baby sister do it,
That's cool.
It's really awesome. As far as my own kids and their sibling relationship, I have a couple different dynamics there. One of my favorite things is my oldest is 23 and the triplets are 9. They are 14 years apart. And there are times where Legos are huge. My oldest had every Lego that there was. And there are times when he will still get down on the floor and build with the boys, and even my daughter sometimes. And the four of them just sit. I mean, they're 14 years apart. There's not a lot of things that will hold all of their attention.
Yeah.
Legos is one of them. And so to sit and watch that, like, it's just really cool. He will still have Nerf battles with the boys. I don't always love the aftermath of hundreds of bullets all
Everywhere.
but watching my 3 boys run around and they're talking to their sweaters, or they talking to their shirts, I guess. And so getting to see that is really cool. Yeah. And then as far as the triplets go, they're a minute apart, but getting to see that dynamic, it's just a really, really cool thing. One of the things, my daughter dances, and she is my favorite ballerina. But every year at her dance recital, the boys have T-shirts that say "Proud Brother" on the back. So we've taken a picture every year of them facing the other way, and she has her shoulders up on them, and it's their Proud Brother shirts, and she's in her dance costume, and they are just cheering her on. Like you said about your boys, like that's what you choose as a punishment. Watching, like going to watch her classes, they will get out of it every chance they can. That is not their thing. But the end of year, like recital, they are there. My husband takes them to buy flowers so that they have their own flowers to give her. And so seeing their relationship, it's really, really cool. Really cool.
I would say seeing my kids, because they're so far apart, like bond over the same thing. So like some of my favorite like pictures, like they usually bond like over like water, right? And which is cool because like now we have a pool at our new house, so I can't wait to make memories in that pool. Like, you know, there's not many things that they really bond over, right?
Try Legos.
And we have like a huge bin of Legos, and when we moved, I like taped it and I wrote like caution Legos because I was like, listen, if this drops, it's gonna be fun. But yeah, I think like just seeing them at so many different ages, so many different developments, you know, again, like the blending of the families together, and so just seeing them like laughing and enjoying the same thing, like really just like, you know, warms my heart, and it is actually like one of my favorite things. Like, or we'll play a game together, and like everybody's like they love playing Beat the Parents, and like, you know, they usually do, but and we make ridiculous, like sometimes I'm like, oh, why did we bet that? But anyway, yeah. So just seeing like, you know, at that various age range that they are, like seeing them being able to like enjoy the same thing collectively.
Yeah, I would say probably mine is aligned with that. It's watching them create together, kind of whatever that is. So they have like a workshop and they build things out of cardboard boxes and make cities, or they will put on a performance for us, or it's those little moments of creation, like in the midst of their sea of destruction, that I think are just so special to watch. And I think that that's where at least from my perspective, my hope is that we see a glimpse into their future relationship. Like right now, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of, well, I'm mom's favorite. No, I'm mom's favorite. Well, I like dad more. Well, I want this. Blah, 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 blah. And so we have a lot of that, but it's those little glimpses into like what they are capable of becoming when, you know, they have fully developed prefrontal cortexes and all those different pieces. Well, thank you all so much for joining me here today. Is there anything that is left unsaid before we wrap?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then as we finish, we have a couple upcoming pods here at the How to Be Happy Hour. This entire season, we're looking at relationships. So we have one more coming up looking at romantic relationships. We're going to spend some time talking about the apps. We'd like to talk about dating apps and how that impedes or serves us in our quest for joy or happiness. I can't wait for our cousins pod to look at cousin relationships. And we are also going to be driving towards, what's the other one that's big that's coming up? Oh, grandparent relationships and the role of a grandparent in our development, as well as the role of grandchildren in our later in life experiences. So thank you so much for listening. I am Kim Ernest, and this is the How to Be Happy Hour. See you next time.